My name is Cloze, and first I will explain about the importance of listening. Listening is often employed as a component of speaking. How could you speak a language without listening? To determine if someone is a proficient user of language, people customarily ask, "Do you speak Spanish?" People rarely say, "Do you understand and speak Spanish?" Every teacher of language knows that one's oral production ability, monologue, speeches, reading aloud, and the like is only as good as listening comprehension ability. We therefore need to pay close attention to listening as a mode of performance for assessment in the classroom. Next, basic types of listening. Each of these stages represents a potential assessment objective. Comprehending of surface structure elements such as phonemes, words, intonation, or a grammatical category. Understanding of pragmatic context. Determining meaning of auditory input. Developing the gist, a global or comprehensive understanding. From the stage, we can derive four commonly identified types of listening performance, each of which comprises a category within which to consider assessment tasks and procedures. First, intensive. Listening for perception of the components, phonemes, words, intonation, discourse makers, and etc. of a large stretch of language. Second, responsive. Listening to a relatively short stretch of language, a greeting, question, comment, comprehension check, and etc. in order to make an equally short response. Third, selective. Processing traces of discourse such as short monologues for several minutes in order to scan for certain information. The purpose of such performance is not necessarily to look for global or general meanings, but to be able to comprehend designed information in a context of longer stretches of spoken language, such as classroom directions from a teacher, TV or radio news items, or stories. And the last, extensive. Listening to develop a top-down global understanding of spoken language. Extensive performance range from listening to lengthy lectures to listening to a conversation and deriving a comprehensive message or purpose. Listening for the gist, for the main idea, and making inferences are all part of extensive listening. Next, micro and macro skills of listening. Micro skill, attending to the smaller bits and chunks of language in more of bottom-up process. And macro skill, focusing on the large elements involved in a top-down approach. Next, designing assessment task intensive listening. Once you have determined objectives, your next step is to design the task, including making decisions about how you will elicit performance and how you will expect the test taker to respond. Next, recognizing phonological and morphological elements. For example, phonemic pair consonant. Test takers hear, "He's from California." Test takers read, A. He's from California. B. She's from California. Phonemic pair vowels. Test takers here. Is he living? Test takers read. A. Is he living? B. Is he living? Morphological periods ending. Test takers here. I missed you very much. Test takers read. A. I missed you very much. B. I miss you very much. Series pattern in can't. Test takers here. My girlfriend can't go to the party. Test takers here read. A. My girlfriend can't go to the party. B. My girlfriend can go to the party. Paraphrase recognition. For example, sentence paraphrase. Test takers here. Hello, my name is Keiko. I come from Japan. Test takers read. A. Keiko is comfortable in Japan. B. Keiko wants to come to Japan. C. Keiko is Japanese. D. Keiko likes Japan. Dialogue paraphrase. Test takers read here. Man, hi Maria. My name's Georgie. Woman, nice to meet you, Georgie. Are you American? Man, no, I'm Canadian. Test takers read. A. Georgia lives in the United States. B. Georgia is American. C. Georgia comes from Canada. D. Maria is Canadian.
And now, my name is Livia Versi, and I will read about designing assessment tasks or responsive listening. A question and answer format can provide some interactivity in this lower and listening task. The test taker's response is the appropriate answer to a question. For the example, how much time did you take to do your homework? Test taker reads. A. In about an hour. B. About an hour. C. About $10. And D. Yes, I did. The objective of this item is recognizing of the WH question, how much, and its appropriate response. These structures are chosen to represent common learner errors. A. Responding to how much versus how much longer. And C. Confusing how much in reference to time versus the more frequent reference to money. And D. Confusing a WH question with a yes or no question. And in the next slide, I will explain about designing assessment tasks, selective listening. A third type of listening performance is selective listening, in which the test taker listens to a limited quantity of oral input and must discern within it some specific information. A number of techniques have been used that require selective listening. And in the next is listening cloze. Other listening cloze tasks may focus on a grammatical category such as verb, tense, articles, two-word verbs, prepositions, or transitions, words or phrases. Notice two important structural differences between listening cloze tasks and standard reading cloze. In a listening cloze, deletions are governed by the objective of the test, not by mathematical deletion of every word, and more than one word may be deleted, as in the above example. And now, I will explain about information transfer. Selective listening can also be assessed through an information transfer technique in which orally processed information must be transferred to a visual representation, such as labeling a diagram, identifying an element in a picture, completing a form, or showing routes on a map. At the lower end of the scale of linguistic complexity, simple picture code items are sometimes efficient rubric for assessing certain selected information. Information transfer tasks may reflect greater authenticity by using charts, maps, grid, timetables, and other artifacts of daily life. In the example below, test takers here a student daily schedule, and the task is to fill in the partially completed weekly calendar. And the last is sentence repetition. The task of simply repeating a sentence or a partial sentence or sentence repetitions is also used as an assessment of listening comprehension. As in a dictation discussed below, the test taker must retain a stretch of a language long enough to reproduce it, and then must respond with an oral repetition of that stimulus. Sentence repetition is far from a flawless listening assessment task. Note that such tasks are not just tests of listening, but tests of general oral skill. Further, this task may test only recognition of sound, and it can easily be contaminated by a lack of short-term memory ability, thus invalidating it as an assessment of comprehension alone, and the teacher may never be able to distinguish a listening comprehension error from an oral production error. Therefore, sentence repetition tasks should be used with caution. Okay, thank you, and the next will be explained by Ani Dwi Restiani.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I'm Ani Dwi Restiani. I will explain about designing assessment task, extensive listening. Drawing a clear distinction between any two of the categories of listening referred to here is problematic, but perhaps the fuzziest division is between selective and extensive listening. Some important questions about designing assessment in this level emerge. First, can listening performance be distinguished from cognitive processing factors such as memory, association, storage, and recall? Second, as assessment procedure become more communicative, does the task take into account test take ability to use grammatical expectancies, lexical collocation, semantic interpretation, and pragmatic competence? Third, are tasks themselves correspondingly content valid and authentic? That is, do they mirror real world language and content? Fourth, as assessment tasks become more and more open-ended, they more closely resemble pedagogical tasks, which lead one to ask what the difference is between assessment and teaching task. The answer is scoring. For the former imply specific scoring procedure, while the latter do not. And the next slide, communicative stimulus response task. Another and more authentic example of extensive listening is found in a popular genre of assessment task in which the test taker is present with a stimulus monologue or conversation and then is asked to respond to a set comprehension question. Stimulus monologue or conversation and then is asked to respond to a set of comprehension questions. Such tasks as you saw in chapter 4 in the discussion of standardized testing are commonly used in commercially produced proficiency tests. The monologue, lectures, and brief conversation used in such tasks are sometimes little contribute, and certainly in subsequent multiple situation, though minor communicative real-life situation. As example, at page 134, first, this is example of conversation. Thus this meet the criterion of authenticity. If you want to be painfully fuzzy, you might object that it is rare in the real world to eavesdrop on someone else doctor-patient conversation. Nevertheless, the conversation itself is relatively authentic. We all have doctor-patient exchange like this, equally authentic if you add a grain of salt are monologues, lectures, and news story, all of which are commonly utilized as listening stimuli to be followed by comprehension question, addressing certain objectives that are built into the stimulus. Next, we will try to address this question as we look at a number of extensive or quasi-extensive listening comprehension tasks. First, dictation. Dictation is a widely researched genre of assessing listening comprehension, and dictation have been used as assessment tools for decades. Some readers still cringe at the thought of having to render a correctly spelled verbatim version of a paragraph or story recited by the teacher. Dictation have been used as assessment tools for decades. Some readers still cringe at the thought of having to render a correctly spelled. The difficulty of a dictation task can be easily manipulated by the length of the word group or burst as they are technically called, the length of the pause, the speed at which the text is read, and the complexity of the coarse grammar and vocabulary used in a passage. Scoring is another matter. Depending on your context and purpose in administering dictation, you will to decide on scoring criteria for several possible kinds of error. First, spelling error only, but the word appears to have been heard correctly. Second, spelling and or obvious misrepresentation of a word, illegible word. Next, grammatical error. For example, test taker hers, I can do it, right, I can do it. And next, skip word or phrase, permutation of word, and then additional word not in the original, and the last, replacement of the word with an appropriate synonym. Next slide about authentic listening task. Authentic listening task. Ideally, the language assessment field would have a stockpile of listening test types that are cognitively demanding, communicative, and authentic. not to mention interactive by means of an integration with speaking. However, the nature of a test as a sample of performance and a set of tasks with limited time frames implies an equally limited capacity to mirror all the real context of listening performance. Steinbach 2001, page 92 said about every test requires some component of communicative language ability and no tests cover them all. Similarity with the notion of authenticity, every task shares some characteristic with target language task and no task is completely authentic. Here are some possibilities. First, note-taking. In the academic world, classroom lectures by professors are common features of non-native English user experience. One form of a midterm examination at the American Language Institute at San Francisco State University, Khan 2002 used a 15-minute lecture as a stimulus. One among several response formats includes note-taking by the test taker. These notes are evaluated by the teacher on 30-point system on page 136. Second, editing. Another authentic test provides both a written and a spoken stimulus and requires the test taker to listen for discrepancies. Scoring achieved relatively high reliability, as there are usually a small number of specific differences that must be identified. Here is the way the task proceeds of editing a written version of an oral stimulus on page 137. One potentially interesting set of stimuli for such a task is the description of a political scandal first from a newspaper with a political bias and then form of radio broadcast from an alternative news station. And the third, interpretative task. One of the intensive listening tasks described above was paraphrasing a story of conversation. An interpretive task extends the stimulus material to a longer stretch of discourse and focus the test taker to infer a response. Potential stimuli include song lyric, recite poetry, radio or television news report, and an oral account of an experience. Test takers are then directed to interpret the stimulus by answering a few questions. Questioning might be, why was the singer feeling sad? Or what event might have led up to the reciting of this poem? Or what do you think the political activities might do next? Why? And then, what do you think the storyteller felt about the mysterious disappearance of her neglect? This kind of text moves us away from what might traditionally be considered a test toward an informal assessment, or possibly even a pedagogical technique or activity. But tests conform to certain time limitations, and the question can be quite specific even though they ask the test taker to use inference. And the last, retelling. In a relate task, test taker listen to a story or news event and simply retell it or summarize it, either orally on an audio tip or in writing. In so doing, test taker must identify the keys, main idea, purpose, supporting points, and or conclusion to show full comprehension. Scoring is potentially predetermined by specifying a minimum number of elements that must appear in the retelling. Again, reliability may suffer, and the time and effort needed to read and evaluate the response lower. Practically, validity, cognitive processing, communicative ability, and authenticity are all well incorporated into the task. A fifth category of listening comprehension was hinted at earlier in the chapter, interactive listening, because such interaction, a process of speaking in concern with listening. The interactive nature of listening will be addressed in the next